Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Off to the side, Bai Xiaochun saw a pile of a few dozen bags of holding. Upon checking them, he gasped at the sight of 10,000 earth flame crystals. Furthermore, everything else that he had asked for was there, without exception. Even the spirit alcohol he had requested had been provided in full measure. Bai Lin wasn't just showing off. 3 days. It only took him 3 days to get all of this. By this point, his eyes were shining with excitement and determination. Furthermore, he was determined that, considering Bai Lin had kept his promise, there was absolutely no reason to hold back from working hard to keep his. Having reached this point in his train of thought, Bai Xiaochun looked over at the Major General. "If it's not too much trouble," he said, "please let the General know that I won't hold anything back in my work." The old man nodded. "These are 4 of my best soldiers. You have a big responsibility to bear, so I'm going to leave them here to stand guard and make sure nobody disturbs you." With that, the old man turned and left. The 4 young men had cold expressions on their faces as they walked some distance off and then sat down cross-legged. From the look of it, they weren't there to protect him, but to keep an eye on him. After all, the items which had just been delivered were extremely valuable, and had only been acquired through some effort on Bai Lin's part. Bai Xiaochun immediately ignored the gazes of the 4 young men. He was simply too excited. The sight of so many pill furnaces and so many medicinal plant ingredients had him itching to get to work. "It's been a long time since I concocted any medicine," he murmured, licking his lips. Having nothing to fear regarding future ramifications, Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but feel that everything in life was going perfectly at the moment. He even threw his head back and laughed merrily. As for the 4 young men, they looked over at him and frowned, but did little else. "To make my soul convergence pills more powerful, I can't just add more medicinal ingredients. I need to completely readjust the formula." With that, he sat down cross-legged and began to take the medicinal plants out of the bags of holding. Then, the light of augury flickered in his eyes as he began to analyze them on a deep level. Soon, the foundations of a new medicine formula appeared in his head. 3 days went by in a flash, during which time Bai Xiaochun didn't sleep or rest. He was completely immersed in the process of adjusting the medicine formula. His eyes soon became shot with blood, and occasionally he would stand up and pace around in the courtyard, muttering to himself. "No, that won't work. Should I use smelting techniques? There isn't much spiritual energy here, so it would be hard to make that work. Completely seal the pill furnace? The impure vital energy would make the ingredients melt faster, but with so much qi in the mix, there would be a bigger risk of the furnaces exploding." Bai Xiaochun muttered and frowned, seemingly bedeviled. As for the 4 guards, they often exchanged awkward glances at Bai Xiaochun's strange behavior. Meanwhile, the other grandmasters in the armory had heard that Bai Xiaochun was beginning to concoct medicine, and their hearts were all filled with cold laughter. Some of them even went over to Bai Xiaochun's residence to try to get a peek at what he was doing. The guards didn't pay them any attention. As long as they didn't enter the residence itself, they wouldn't do anything to interfere with them. "He's being deliberately mystifying. I can't wait to see the true level of his skill. HMPH. If he doesn't concoct the first batch successfully, his head will be on the chopping block." Of course, even to these grandmasters, the sight of 100 top-quality pill furnaces was shocking, and led to quite a bit of jealousy and envy. 2 more days went by, and some of the grandmasters who had gathered outside started to get impatient and leave. Before long, only 8 remained behind. Bai Lin also came for a visit, his face grim because of the fighting that was going on outside. After looking at Bai Xiaochun for a moment, he decided not to disturb him, and left. On the afternoon of the 6th day, Bai Xiaochun suddenly looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, and his face a bit wan. However, a strange gleam could be seen in his pupils. "I need to use the cloudy soul leaf as the main ingredient. Yes, I'll bolster the formula with just a bit of earth spirit tuber, add in the unique properties of the atmosphere flower, and then seal the pill furnace up tight. That should increase the power of the soul convergence pill by several times. Well, there's only one way to find out if I'm right. I'll start out with 10 batches." By this point, Bai Xiaochun had lost track of time, and wasn't even aware that there were people around watching him. Convinced that he was going in the right direction, he waved his right hand, causing 10 pill furnaces to fly over and land in front of him. Then he waved his sleeve, sending their lids flying off. Next, he tossed some earth flame crystals underneath the pill furnaces, and unleashed their earth flame power. In the blink of an eye, the 10 pill furnaces turned bright red, and began to emanate intense heat. The 4 young guards all looked over, intense expressions of concentration on their faces. Bai Xiaochun was completely focused on the furnaces. Even as they continued to heat up, he unhesitatingly began to put the medicinal plant ingredients inside, following the formula that currently existed in his head. Because this was his first test, he was careful with every action, hoping to prevent any failures from cropping up at the end of the concocting process. He even put all the ingredients into the furnaces in very careful order. In this session of concocting, he was at his peak state, whether that meant his thinking or his actions. That was why he had selected only 10 furnaces, and also why he was being very careful about the order he put the ingredients in. Finally, his eyes shone as he put the lids back onto the furnaces, performed a double-handed incantation gesture, and then roared, "Seal." Numerous magical sealing marks flew out from his hands, landing on one of the furnaces, which trembled in response. After the sealing was performed, its lid was closed tighter than ever, leaving not even the slightest opening. He employed more than 100 such sealing marks, until he was sure that the furnace was absolutely shut tight. It wasn't even possible for smoke to emerge from it. Having accomplished these things, Bai Xiaochun had sweat dripping down his face. However, he didn't look away from the furnaces. Slapping his bag of holding, he produced a bottle of spirit alcohol, downed it, and then continued to add sealing marks to the furnace. When he was satisfied, he went on to seal the other 9 furnaces, after which he took a few steps back, face a bit pale. Settling down cross-legged, he began to do some breathing exercises. The 4 young guards had been watching the whole time, and although they pretended that they understood what was going on, they really didn't. However, the surrounding grandmasters apparently did. Is he sealing the medicinal ingredients? No, that can't be right. You don't seal the ingredients by sealing the furnaces, do you? What is he thinking? Sealing the furnaces increases their chances of exploding. Does this Bai Xiaochun really know how to concoct medicine? He's wasting all of those precious medicinal plants. I guarantee you that those furnaces will explode within 8 hours. HMPH. When the time comes, you people just wait and see if I'm right. The disdain that the grandmasters felt for Bai Xiaochun was very clear. Time passed, and soon the 8-hour mark approached. The grandmasters were all staring at the pill furnaces, and just as they had predicted, the furnaces were not just bright red, they were trembling and emitting cracking noises. There were even heat waves spreading out in all directions. The situation seemed especially dire with 5 of the furnaces. Cracks were spreading out over their surfaces, and it seemed very likely that they were going to explode. Bai Xiaochun's eyes went wide when he saw those 5 particular furnaces. Backing away, he shouted, "Those furnaces are gonna blow. Everybody, heads up." Even as he edged away, his hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture as he tried to protect the 5 pill furnaces that weren't cracked. As for the 4 young guards, cold smiles could be seen on their faces. These young men had fought in countless battles, and had profound core formation cultivation bases. As far as they were concerned, they had seen everything there was to see, and therefore, a few exploding pill furnaces wasn't anything to worry about. Right? As for the grandmasters outside of the residence, they were all looking on disdainfully, and even with disinterest. What's the big deal about a few trifling pill furnaces exploding? This Grandmaster Bai really doesn't know how to keep his cool. When a concocting session ends with the pill furnace exploding, the size of the explosion depends on the type of pill furnace and the type of pill. A Tier 3 pill furnace will make a bit of a bang, but it's nothing to be scared of. Sealing the pill furnace might make the medicinal pills inside slightly stronger, and can lead to the furnace exploding, but won't add that much power. When the 4 young guards heard what the Grandmasters were saying, they calmed down a bit. However, considering how close they were to the pill furnaces, some of them brought out defensive magical devices just in case. One of the young guards was so confident in the level of his cultivation base that he didn't even take out a defensive magical device. As the surrounding grandmasters continued to scorn Bai Xiaochun, the surfaces of 2 of the 5 weakened pill furnaces were suddenly covered with nothing but cracks. Apparently, the energy that had been building up inside them had reached a point that the furnaces couldn't contain it anymore. Finally, both furnaces exploded. A wave of energy immediately burst out, filled with shockingly terrifying power. Shrapnel buzzed out in all directions like meteors, accompanied by a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering boom. As the energy wave spread outward, the air distorted, and brightly colored light flashed in heaven and earth. Everyone in the area felt their ears tingling with pain from the intense noise. The courtyard's spell formation was instantly damaged, and although it wasn't completely destroyed, several enormous holes were punched into it. As for the 4 young guards, their eyes went wide and their mouths opened, but they had no time to do anything else. In the blink of an eye, the energy wave from the 2 exploding pill furnaces was upon them. The 3 who had taken precautionary actions had it better off. Blood sprayed out of their mouths as they were blown back several hundred meters. There, they slammed into the ground, bones shattered and blood oozing out of their eyes, ears, noses, and mouths. Even their soul flames were flickering, as though their souls might be wrenched out of them at any moment. As for the 4th young guard, the cocky one who had failed to take out a defensive magical item, he screamed miserably as the energy blast picked him up and hurled him far off into the distance. No one could even tell where he landed. Things weren't over yet, though. If those 4 young guards were affected in such a way, it almost wasn't necessary to mention all of the Grandmasters, none of whom had produced any defensive items at all. Despite being outside of the courtyard, they were incapable of fleeing, and as the energy wave continued to spread, miserable screams rang out as they were violently hurled backward. Blood sprayed out of their mouths, and their souls seemed to teeter unstably. Each and every one was injured without exception. Simultaneously, everything in the area began to shake, and quite a few nearby buildings collapsed. The power that was being unleashed right now was almost unimaginable. This is impossible. Heavens! Was that explosion really from a pill furnace? How could this be happening? What did Bai Xiaochun do to that pill furnace? I've been concocting pills for my entire life, and I've never seen an explosion like that. That was more like some sort of deadly magical attack. Even as their shrieks rang out, the armory continued to tremble, and numerous cultivators flew out into the open and looked in the direction of Bai Xiaochun's residence, shocked expressions on their faces. Bai Xiaochun was quite frightened by what was happening. However, he had been retreating to begin with, and also had an incredibly powerful fleshly body, and furthermore, didn't hesitate to unleash some frigid chi to protect himself. As such, he was unharmed. Even he had been completely unaware that his newly developed medicine formula would cause an explosion of this scale. It was almost on the same level as an attack by a nascent soul cultivator. Furthermore, the soul convergence pills were designed to affect souls, and therefore, everyone affected felt as if their souls were about to be ripped out of their bodies. Many of them were now staring ahead blankly, as if they had lost the ability to even think. And that was the result of only 2 exploding pill furnaces. It was easy to imagine what could happen if more of them exploded. Most likely, the people in the area would either be ripped to shreds, or at least, sustain incredible damage to their souls. This. A look of blank shock could be seen on Bai Xiaochun's face as he looked at the remaining 3 pill furnaces. Cracks were spreading out on their surfaces, and energy was continuing to build up inside of them. Clearly, they were about to explode. Gasping, Bai Xiaochun began to back up. It was in that instant that an enraged roar filled the air. Bai Xiaochun! It was like a deafening clap of heavenly thunder that shook everything in the area. Simultaneously, a black-clad figure suddenly teleported into the area from off in the distance. It was none other General Bai Lin of the Skin Flayers. Feeling both wronged and crestfallen, Bai Xiaochun blurted, "You can't blame me. I warned you about this." After all, he really had offered a warning, only to be disbelieved. Moments before, Bai Lin had been on the wall, offering support to the troops as they fought. Because someone had tampered with the underworld river, there were currently boundless amounts of vengeful souls outside of the Great Wall. The 5 legions were under a lot of pressure, especially because necromancers had been spotted out in the enemy forces. It was for that very reason that Bai Lin had personally taken charge of the battle. However, before the necromancers could make a move, a huge explosion had rocked the armory, sending out an energy blast that shocked even Bai Lin. Alarmed, he had teleported over, to be met with a scene of complete disaster. Everyone in the area was coughing up blood, and in addition to that, there were 3 severely damaged pill furnaces that were clearly on the verge of detonating. Despite being enraged, there was no time for thought or planning on Bai Lin's part. Roaring, he grabbed the 3 pill furnaces, then teleported up to the Great Wall and hurled them out toward the other side. Outside of the Great Wall, countless vengeful souls blotted out the sky because of their sheer numbers. Many of them were converging together to form soul emperors that howled at the tops of their lungs as they charged, seemingly oblivious to their own existence or destruction. As the shimmering shield rising up from the wall rippled under the force of the attacks, the cultivators of the 5 legions poured all the power they could into their magical cannons, sending destructive beams of light out without cease. Unfortunately, there were just too many souls, and the resistance of the cultivators was already proving to be somewhat futile. There were also large numbers of savages intermingled amidst the souls, who used their formidable physical bodies to viciously fight their way toward the wall, where they would unhesitatingly self-detonate. As a result, casualties were rising among the 5 legions. It was in that moment that the 3 scarlet pill furnaces, each one of them roughly 3 meters tall, sailed through the air like suns, crushing anything in their path. Then, they landed on the ground, so many cracks spreading out on their surfaces that it seemed impossible for them to last any longer without exploding. The savages seemed shocked that they were being attacked by pill furnaces, which were objects completely unfamiliar to them. One of the savages, who was several dozen meters tall, snorted coldly and flew through the air toward the nearest furnace, upon which he unleashed a mighty fist strike. In that instant, the combined forces inside and outside of the furnace proved too much for it to sustain. A boom echoed out that could shake heaven and earth as the furnace exploded, sending burning shrapnel out all over the battlefield. As everything in the area shook violently, countless vengeful souls screamed, and many of the nearby beasts which couldn't avoid the blast were instantly lit on fire. The savage who had just struck the pill furnace screamed as the energy overwhelmed him, wiping out most of his body as he was flung backward. However, the explosion itself was not the most powerful aspect of the blast. The medicinal strength of the soul convergence pill was instantly unleashed into a 3,000-meter area, causing all of the vengeful souls to tremble as they were latched onto by a powerful gravitational force. Then, the energy shockwave rolled past, shredding them to bits. Everything happened so quickly that the savages and vengeful souls had no time to react. Moments later, the other 2 pill furnaces exploded, and in the briefest of instants, deafening booms and shrill screams filled the entire battlefield. Numerous savages were slain, and countless beasts and souls were ripped apart. Seas of flame erupted out, and enormous, shocking craters were torn into the ground. As the blood and gore spread out in all directions, the surviving savages looked around in shock, and even the mostly unintelligent vengeful souls seemed terrified. What were those magical items? How could this be happening? I've never seen anything like this. One by one, the savages turned to look at the Great Wall, expressions of profound fear on their faces. The truth was that they weren't the only ones to react in such a way. The cultivators on the Great Wall, not only the skin flayers, but also the cultivators from the other 4 legions, were dumbstruck. What were those things? How come they seemed like pill furnaces? How is that even possible? How could pill furnaces release power like that? I'm pretty sure that General Bai Lin of the skin flayers personally threw them out. Could it be some sort of newly invented magical item? Everyone was shaken, and in fact, Bai Lin was so shocked that his anger completely dissipated. He stood there looking out blankly at the craters outside of the Great Wall, and the terrified souls and savages, and after a moment, he began to pant. Then, his eyes began to glow with unprecedented brightness, and even joy. The explosion is of secondary value, Bai Lin thought, his eyes shining more brightly by the moment. The most important aspect is the medicinal effect, which increases the potency by severalfold. Finally, he laughed loudly for a moment before turning and heading back toward the armory. Bai Xiaochun was currently feeling very out of sorts as he stood there, nervously watching the remaining 5 pill furnaces. Quite a few cultivators had come to investigate the huge noise from earlier, and were now staring in shock at the wreckage in the area. Although Bai Xiaochun's residence hadn't been completely destroyed, it had been severely damaged. Of the 4 guards, 1 had been flung to parts unknown, and the remaining 3 were now looking at Bai Xiaochun with expressions of dread on their faces. As for the Grandmasters, they were all consuming medicinal pills and glaring angrily at Bai Xiaochun. You really can't blame me, he said nervously. I warned you all ahead of time. Listen to me, everyone. Either back up, or take out some defensive magical items. After all, you people came here of your own volition. I didn't ask you over. When I used to concoct medicine back in the day, no one would even get close. Back on Middle Peak in the Bloodstream sect, the minute I started concocting medicine, everyone fled the whole mountain. It would probably have been better if Bai Xiaochun hadn't said anything at all. As soon as the words left his mouth, the people who had just recently been injured flared into a rage. You destroyed the armory. You hurt your fellow disciples. Let's see how you explain this to the general, Bai Xiaochun. When other people cause pill furnaces to explode, they lose the pill, nothing more. But you were obviously trying to cause problems. Everyone was glaring at him with gritted teeth, especially the Grandmasters, who now hated Bai Xiaochun more than ever. After all, they had merely come to see what was happening, and could never have guessed that their lives would have been at risk because of exploding pill furnaces. Even more terrifying was how they had felt their souls being tugged at. Bai Xiaochun really felt a headache coming on, and that was only compounded when he thought about how angry Bai Lin had been. Obviously, Bai Lin had ignored all of the warnings that Bai Xiaochun had given. As he considered that point, his frown deepened, and his sighs grew longer. Even as he was trying to come up with some good ideas about how to explain himself, a beam of light rumbled through the air in his direction. It was none other than General Bai Lin. He was moving with such incredible speed that he appeared above the armory only a moment later, where he dropped down in front of Bai Xiaochun. Looking very somber and eyes shining with an odd gleam, he looked at Bai Xiaochun and said, "Do you know what you've done, Bai Xiaochun?" Bai Xiaochun had no idea what had occurred outside of the Great Wall, and as a result, his heart was pounding with fear and anger. Therefore, he decided to just throw caution to the wind. "General," he said loudly, "I told you about what can happen when I concoct medicine. You said that I should focus on my work and that you would take responsibility for everything else. You said the results of my work would have nothing to do with me. You said." Before he could finish speaking, Bai Lin stepped forward and grabbed his arm. Not only was he incredibly quick, but his cultivation base was far beyond Bai Xiaochun's. Therefore, it was impossible for Bai Xiaochun to evade him. As soon as Bai Xiaochun felt himself being grabbed by Bai Lin, a tremor ran through him, and he prepared to call upon his frigid qi to defend himself. However, it was at that point that he realized Bai Lin had a very strange expression on his face. His eyes were shining with unprecedented brightness, and he could hardly keep his breathing under control. He was almost looking at Bai Xiaochun the way one might look at a rare gem. "How could the results have nothing to do with you? More like the opposite. Ha ha ha. Bai, my boy, you definitely didn't disappoint. Keep up the good work. Concoct away to your heart's content. Who cares about a few exploded pill furnaces, right? Do things exactly how you want to. The more explosions that occur, the better. In fact, if you can make them even more explosive, that would be great. The more terrifying the better. And don't worry, I'll take care of any dangerous situations." With that, he threw his head back and laughed heartily. Not only was Bai Xiaochun shocked by Bai Lin's words, but so were all the other spectators, who had all assumed that Bai Lin would descend in a deadly rage. Never could they have imagined that things would turn out opposite of the way they had anticipated. What's going on? The recently injured grandmasters almost couldn't believe what they were seeing. It surpassed their imaginations to the point that it didn't even seem real. Even as everyone stared in shock, Bai Lin thought back to what had just occurred outside the Great Wall, and his excitement continued to build. As far as he was concerned, each and every exploding pill furnace was a deadly weapon that could be unleashed upon the souls and savages. Furthermore, they could be used to accumulate incredible battle credit. Throughout the years, the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect had come up with many ideas to deal with the Wildlanders. They had tried all sorts of soul-exterminating techniques, but none of them would ever be very effective for long. Usually, the Wildlanders would come up with a way to neutralize whatever effect was being used against them. Therefore, Bai Lin wasn't expecting Bai Xiaochun's new method to be effective for very long. However, even just being able to dominate the Sea of Souls temporarily would be a good thing. Furthermore, the Underworld River had recently been tampered with, which was a major event. Even the Diva Chen was enraged by that development. "Bai, my boy," Bai Lin said seriously, "I only have one requirement, and that is to work faster. Can you pick up the speed of your concocting work?" Bai Xiaochun was a bit taken aback. This was his first time hearing Bai Lin address him as "my boy," and it sounded somewhat intimate. It took him a moment to realize that Bai Lin wasn't actually reprimanding him, but rather, encouraging him to make more exploding pill furnaces. "I can't believe someone wants me to detonate pill furnaces intentionally. I guess Bai Lin must have found some use for them." Unable to hold back his curiosity, he simply asked Bai Lin directly. Bai Lin didn't conceal the truth. He explained what had just occurred outside the Great Wall, after which Bai Xiaochun's face lit up with excitement. Lifting his head proudly, he said, "Well, that's what I thought would happen. Did you really think my research was just about how to improve the Soul Converge pills? Obviously, I was aiming for something more useful, and apparently, I succeeded." When Bai Xiaochun concocts medicine, he always ponders how to do it in the most timely and advantageous fashion. "You know, I actually intended for the pill furnaces to explode. Furthermore, the medicinal pills in the furnaces were only 90% complete. The final blast of energy was what catalyzed the last bit of the process, releasing the perfect amount of medicinal strength at exactly the moment of detonation." With that, he flicked his sleeve and stuck his chin up. Everyone else in the area exchanged awkward glances. If they hadn't heard his nervous explanations from moments before, they might actually have believed him. Bai Lin cleared his throat, but didn't interrupt Bai Xiaochun's boasting. Apparently, he even approved of it. That in and of itself left everyone even more shaken. None of them had ever seen Bai Lin treat someone with such courtesy. It made it very obvious how highly he valued Bai Xiaochun. Waving his sleeve proudly, Bai Xiaochun said, "Don't worry, brother Bai, it will take 3 days at the most for me to get another batch of exploding furnaces ready." "No problem at all." Bai Lin laughed heartily, then set a specific date to come get the furnaces, after which he turned to leave. Before vanishing, he cast an ominous glare at the grandmasters in the area, causing them to duck their heads and scatter. They were all feeling very down about the whole thing, but there was nothing they could do but grit their teeth and endure. As for the 3 young guards, they were thoroughly rebuked by their major general for what had happened. Later, their friends told them what had occurred outside of the Great Wall, leaving them completely awestruck. 1. As for the young guard who had been blasted off to parts unknown, he eventually was found, weak-kneed and nearly torn to shreds. The terror he felt toward Bai Xiaochun couldn't have been more intense. And thus, the ordeal ended. As for the other 5 pill furnaces, Bai Xiaochun opened them up later that night to find that, even though the furnaces hadn't detonated, the medicinal pills inside of them were nothing more than slag. He pondered the matter for a while, then got some rest. The following morning at dawn, he emerged from his residence, sat down in front of the pill furnaces and took a deep breath. Then he shouted, "Everybody, stay back. Don't say I didn't warn you. Bai Xiaochun is starting to concoct medicine." His voice echoed out like thunder to fill the entire armory. The other grandmasters hurried out of their residences and scurried off into the distance, their hearts burning with fury. As for the 4 young guards, they began to tremble, and despite not wanting to stay behind, had no choice in the matter. They could only brace themselves, rotate their cultivation bases, and remain fully vigilant. Apparently, Bai Xiaochun's warning was effective. Feeling very pleased, he flicked his sleeve to begin concocting. This time, he decided to work on 20 batches. 1. I don't think I mentioned before that, as the name makes clear in Chinese, major generals command 10,000 men. I think I'm heading in the right direction. I just overlooked a few of the problems that cropped up because of the ingredient interactions. I should be able to do a few tests and work things out. In any case, as long as the furnaces continue to explode, the general will be happy. Bai Xiaochun sighed, convinced that life in Great Wall City was actually wonderful. At the very least, he could concoct medicine in any way he wished, without fear of any punishments. He even got rewarded for detonating pill furnaces, which had never happened before. Looking at the furnaces which had survived the first concocting session, Bai Xiaochun calmed himself and put a somber expression on his face. This time, he intended to vary the ingredient levels in each pill furnace, that way he would be able to quickly identify which medicine formula was the most effective. Having reached the conclusion that this was definitely the best idea, he got to work. Drawing upon the incredible speed of his fleshly body, he began to produce medicinal plants and toss them into the furnaces. He would occasionally adjust the earth flame, ensuring that all of the various batches were being concocted slightly differently. Of course, he couldn't forget how Bai Lin had requested more power. Therefore, he added extra atmosphere flour to some of the furnaces and yet, was careful not to go overboard. After all, he was concocting these pills in his own residence, and if he somehow lost control of one of the batches, causing the furnace to explode ahead of schedule, he could end up hurting himself. It was with caution and reserve that he continued to walk back and forth between the 20 different pill furnaces, making adjustments and occasionally adding more medicinal plants until all 20 of the furnaces were glowing bright red, and were emanating powerful medicinal aromas. As he descended into complete and utter focus regarding this concocting session, the 4 young guards were off to the side, trembling with fear and anxiety. Then, after a few hours had passed, they noticed that Bai Xiaochun was putting lids onto all of the pill furnaces and sealing them. Instantly, the 4 guards' minds began to reel. This is bad. Grandmaster Bai is sealing the pill furnaces again. Heavens! The last set of furnaces exploded because they were sealed, and the energy couldn't escape. After enough energy built up, the furnaces couldn't take it any longer, and exploded. What do we do now? The 4 of them exchanged glances, then gritted their teeth and pulled out defensive magical items, simultaneously backing as far away from the pill furnaces as they could. Bai Xiaochun's eyes were glued to the pill furnaces, and as he adjusted the earth flame, rumbling sounds began to rise up. This time, one of these furnaces is definitely going to explode. It's hard to say which one it will be, but as long as just one of them blows, that will be enough. Of course, his mind was filled with the various ingredient ratios for all 20 furnaces. That, coupled with his manipulation of the earth flame and other concocting methods, would hopefully lead him in the direction of the ultimate medicine formula. Soon, 16 hours had gone by. All 20 pill furnaces were bright red, and were emanating terrifying fluctuations, as well as intense heat. The 4 young guards were shaking visibly, and their hair was standing on end. Last time it took only 8 hours. But now, it's already been 16 hours so far. Suddenly, 4 of the pill furnaces began to emit cracking sounds, and appeared to be in the process of breaking open. Bai Xiaochun's eyes went wide, and he shouted, "They're gonna blow." Simultaneously, he backed up, performing a double-handed incantation gesture as he threw a handful of paper talismans out in front of him, and even used a few magical items to put up some shields. The faces of the 4 young guards completely fell, and yet, even as they hesitated about what to do, cracks spread out across the surfaces of 7 more pill furnaces. Even the ground beneath those furnaces was starting to sink down and distort. Clearly these furnaces were about to detonate. 11. Last time only 2 detonated, and we almost had our souls wrenched out of our bodies. This time 11 are gonna blow. Without any hesitation, everyone began to flee from the courtyard. As for Bai Xiaochun, he was so shocked that his eyes were on the verge of popping out of his head. 11 of them this time. Even as a feeling of unease rose up in his heart, and he backed up, 2 more pill furnaces emitted cracking sounds. 2 more furnaces were about to explode. 13? Bai Xiaochun said with a gasp. Suddenly, he had a very bad feeling in the pit of his stomach. Even as he backed up, more shocking auras spread out from the 13 pill furnaces, and more cracks appeared on their surfaces. By this point, it was actually possible to see with the naked eye that the energy buildup in the furnaces had reached the point where they would detonate at any moment. However, that was when a peal of maniacal laughter suddenly rang out, and Bai Lin miraculously appeared, looking down elatedly at the 13 pill furnaces, as if they were the most valuable of precious treasures. With that, he swished his sleeve, and the 13 scalding hot pill furnaces flew up into the air like miniature suns. Then, Bai Lin called upon the full power of his cultivation base to shoot up toward the top of the Great Wall. Immediately, the cultivators of the 5 legions saw Bai Lin and the 13 brightly glowing pill furnaces, and thought back to the incredible scene which had played out only days before. At that point, Bai Lin let out a powerful roar as he flung all 13 of the pill furnaces out onto the battlefield. The war recently had been playing out differently than usual, and the fighting had been going on this entire time. In the first stage of the conflict, the wildlanders probed and harassed the Great Wall. Then they tampered with the underworld river. And now, they were even drawing upon entire tribes of savages. Although there weren't a huge number of tribes involved at the moment, there were a lot more present than usual. Furthermore, the savage tribes were currently in the middle of a major assault in which more than 10,000 savages joined together in a charge. In addition, they were surrounded by massive hordes of souls from the underworld river. Within that vast sea of souls were certain unique souls who were different and more powerful than the others, and it was with madness and ferocity that they hurtled toward the Great Wall and the shield. The magical cannons on top of the Great Wall itself were being fired constantly, cutting through swath after swath of the enemy. It was in this moment that Bai Xiaochun's 13 pill furnaces were hurled out. Each one of the 13 furnaces was only about 3 meters tall. Compared to the battlefield as a whole, they were very tiny. However, the intense red color with which they shone, coupled with the wild aura which spread out from them, instantly caught the attention of both the 5 legions and the savages. As the pill furnaces flew through the air, many of the savages' faces fell. Those were ones who, although they had not seen the 3 pill furnaces a few days before, had heard the stories of the soul-exterminating magical items that the Great Wall forces were now using. Because the exploding furnaces were a new development, the Wildlands forces had not yet devised a way to deal with them. All they could do was watch as the pill furnaces sailed through the air, then landed onto the ground with deafening booms. The ground trembled as flames rushed out in all directions, along with blasts of energy that rolled along like tsunamis. Even more shocking was the soul-shredding power contained within the blasts. That was the medicinal effect of the soul convergence pills, which spread out to fill a 30,000-meter area. Within that area, all vengeful souls screamed in terror, but were unable to flee. Within the blink of an eye, the energy swept over them, completely destroying them. It was a force that could not be defended against, and moved with incredible speed. From a distance, it almost looked like a pair of hands wiping away everything within that 30,000-meter area. Moments later, those areas were completely empty. The members of the savage tribes were flabbergasted. At the same time, at a location some distance away from the Great Wall itself was an area protected by spell formations and filled with ragged tents. In the middle of that area was a black altar floating in the air, upon which an old man sat cross-legged. Currently, his eyes were shining with disbelief and fury. The source of that fury was an image he was looking at, projected onto a screen of water. Clearly visible was that empty, 30,000-meter area right outside the Great Wall. The plain covered by the spell formation was vast, and was filled with black mists and countless vengeful souls whose screams echoed about and caused the mists to seethe and churn. However, that was only on the borders of the mist-filled area. In the middle was the location filled with dilapidated tents, apparently created from the hides of enormous beasts. There were so many of the tents that they were virtually impossible to number, even from a distance. Within each tent lurked numerous savage giants, clad in hide garments. Some of them were sleeping, others would occasionally walk here and there among the tents. Whenever any of them looked in the direction of the center of the enormous camp, expressions of awe would appear on their faces. Furthermore, if the giants happened to cross glances, they seemed to have to force themselves to hold back from fighting. Apparently, they were extremely violent and short-tempered. Any of them who couldn't hold their temper and actually began to fight would quickly be separated by streams of divine sense sent out by the tribal chiefs. The camp was split up into 10 areas according to the tribes, and although the giants all looked similar, they had clear differences in skin tone and eye color. In addition to the giants were the beasts, which were kept beyond the tens of thousands of tents. Each beast was secured by iron chains, and occasionally let out thunderous roars that shook heaven and earth. In the very center of the tents was a circular area demarcated by a ring of more than 1,009-meter-tall black boulders that emitted intense pressure in all directions. In fact, the air for 30,000 meters in all directions rippled and distorted because of it, seemingly carving that area out of the world itself. Obviously, the black boulders were no mere decorations, but had some sort of magical function. Occasionally, people could be seen walking into and out of the shimmering light cast by the boulders. Although such cultivators were not dressed in expensive, extravagant clothing, they were clearly different from the giants. They were good-looking, well-washed and clean. Clearly, these were none other than Wildlands soul cultivators. Whenever such soul cultivators emerged from the central area in the tents, the savage giants who saw them would drop to their knees and kowtow respectfully. In the Wildlands, soul cultivators occupied a high position, almost like nobility. They were almost like gods who enslaved the savages and commanded the seas of souls. Also in the middle of the ring of black boulders, floating in midair, was a black altar. Damn it, the old man sitting on the altar had a very unsightly expression on his face, and his eyes burned with fury as he watched the scene playing out on the water screen. 13 pill furnaces sailed out from behind the Great Wall, then exploded, completely razing a 30,000-meter area. The looks of fear on the faces of the savages were clearly visible, and as for the vengeful souls, they were clearly terrified. Pill furnaces, the old man murmured, his eyes flashing with hatred. This was his second time seeing pill furnaces thrown out from behind the Great Wall. Of course, what was most shocking was not the explosions themselves, but the medicinal strength of the pills inside of them. Although it was impossible to say what those pills were, they were terrifyingly effective at handling vengeful souls. How can we carry out the Grand Elder's plan this way? We need to get that Chen Hichan outside of the Great Wall and then kill him. The old man frowned. He was sure that it wouldn't take long for the tribal chiefs among the savages to realize the implication of this development. With those terrifying pill furnaces being used, the Sea of Souls would be of little help. As such, the savage giants would have no backup, and it would be difficult to force them to charge into battle. Back on the battlefield outside the Great Wall, the sudden appearance of a 30,000-meter area of emptiness resulted in complete silence. Atop the Great Wall, the cultivators of the 5 legions all gasped, their eyes going wide and their jaws dropping. Then, a huge commotion broke out. Were those the same type of pill furnaces as last time? Heavens! This time was even more shocking than last time. 13 exploding pill furnaces really devastated the Sea of Souls. The countless vengeful souls are clearly terrified. After all, everyone had seen dear friends injured and killed in the fighting. Because of that, their emotions were running particularly high, and many of them turned in the direction of the Skin Flayers district, their eyes shining with bright light. After that, the fighting continued. However, it was clear that the savages and the vengeful souls were slightly hesitant compared to before. Occasionally, they would look up into the sky, seemingly fearful of descending pill furnaces. Bai Lin was thrilled as he turned and headed off of the wall. Back in the armory, Bai Xiaochun was standing there looking absent-mindedly at the unexploded pill furnaces, wondering what was happening outside the Great Wall. However, the situation in the city was the same now as it had been before. Unless something incredibly shocking happened, like the previous appearance of the underworld river, people inside the Great Wall wouldn't be able to hear anything about what was happening on the outside. Bai Lin soon came whistling through the air toward Bai Xiaochun, and before he even arrived, his laughter filled the air. As soon as Bai Xiaochun heard that laughter, his heart calmed, and he struck a lofty pose. Clasping his hands behind his back, he stood there looking like a transcendent being, elegant and graceful to the extreme. Bai, my boy, you did wonderful. As Bai Lin touched down, excitement could still be seen on his face as he waved his hand, sending a violet command medallion with the skin flayer's sigil on it flying toward Bai Xiaochun. The 5 legions of the Hall of Steel Veins have clear punishments and rewards in place. Bai Xiaochun, your success in the Tao of Medicine has earned you the right to lead 10 soldiers. Henceforth, you are a lieutenant of the skin flayers. Considering that Bai Xiaochun was new to the Great Wall, he wasn't completely familiar with everything, and didn't know much about the position of lieutenant. However, the 4 young guards who had been watching over them immediately cast envious glances at the Violet Command Medallion. All of them had been members of the skin flayers for years already, and still had not reached the rank of lieutenant. And yet, Bai Xiaochun had just barely arrived, and was already being promoted. In any other circumstance, they would have found this hard to accept. However, the fear inspired in them by the exploding pill furnaces ensured that, after merely exchanging a few glances among themselves, they all admitted it was reasonable. Not only does that command medallion represent your position in the skin flayers, it also will keep a record of your battle credits. The number of enemies killed by each of your exploding pill furnaces will be collected there. The approval in Bai Lin's eyes couldn't have been clearer, and the truth was that were it not for the strict rules in the 5 legions, he would have directly promoted Bai Xiaochun to the rank of captain. Lieutenant? Bai Xiaochun murmured, accepting the Violet Command Medallion. When he did, something warm spread out from the medallion and entered his body, instantly enlivening him. As of that moment, he realized that this command medallion was no ordinary item. After merging it with his divine sense, he could sense a strange connection between himself and the enormous, towering pagoda in the middle of Great Wall City. That's right, Bai Lin said. Don't underestimate the rank of lieutenant. As of now, you can select 10 cultivators from the army to be your personal entourage. They will have no choice but to follow any and all orders you give them. After giving a bit more encouragement, Bai Lin said that he hoped Bai Xiaochun would be able to make more exploding pill furnaces, and increasingly powerful ones at that. Finally, he left. Bai Xiaochun stood there looking at the lieutenant's command medallion for a moment before blinking a few times and looking up at the 4 young guards. Immediately, the 4 of them stepped forward and saluted solemnly. Greetings, Lieutenant. Feeling wonderful, Bai Xiaochun looked over the group of 4, then glanced down at the command medallion momentarily. Clearing his throat, he looked at the young men and said, "You've been stationed here for some time, and yet I don't know your names. Zhao Long, at your service. Sun Li, at your service. Xu Deishan, at your service. Zhou Wu, at your service." Considering everything these 4 young men had seen over the past several days, and the fact that Bai Xiaochun was now a lieutenant, they looked him with solemn expressions of awe. That was especially true of Zhao Long, who was in the late core formation stage, and seemed especially in awe of Bai Xiaochun. Part of that was because he was the very same young man who had been blasted off into parts unknown a few days before. From now on, you 4 are under my command. We have 6 more spots open, so I'll let you 4 handle that. Hurry up and find the right people. With me in charge, we will advance triumphantly to the highest of heights. Bai Xiaochun felt that the words he had just spoken were quite extraordinary and inspiring. Zhao Long and his companions could see that Bai Xiaochun was on the rise, and that following him was a good choice for them. After a moment of hesitation, they exchanged glances, then voiced their assent and left to find more cultivators. After they were gone, Bai Xiaochun began to inspect the pill furnaces again. Around evening, Zhao Long and the other returned, 6 cultivators in tow. 4 were men and 2 were women, and all of them were looking curiously at Bai Xiaochun. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.